believe that Deb has a birthday coming up, turning 5 maybe,
Yeah.
and Melissa back there also, I think today is a birthday. 6, really? Okay. Congratulations. So wish them happy birthday if you get a chance.
Happy birthday, guys.
And also, turn to 1 Peter. We are picking up in chapter 2 this morning. This finishes out the section that we started 3 weeks ago. We had an introduction from chapter 1, verses 1 through 12, and then a little bit more application. This section has commands threaded through it. A little bit less like, Paul will give you a lot of theology in the first half of his letters, and then most of his application in the end. Peter does sort of a back and forth, and so we've had both foundational theology, that this is what is true in this world and of God and of us in relation, and this is what we should do because of what is true. We've been going back and forth. I have a little more of that today before we get into a little bit more theology for some in chapter 2. But desire here, the Word of God. I actually changed that title slide. You'll see it a little later on and added some to it. So I would say desire the Lord, His Word and His people, or crave the Lord, you could say, is a good title for this. And it's chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. There's an extra 1 up in there. So that title slide is botched, but we'll get the better one in a moment. Would stand with me as we read the Word. Just these 3 verses here, short but packed. Peter tells us, "So put away all malice, and all deceit, and hypocrisy, and envy, and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good." You can have a seat. So here we go. Crave the Lord, His Word, and all that corresponds with the new birth. That's where we started about 4 weeks ago, is this new reality, the new hope we have in the new birth and the inheritance that comes with it, and all that that means in this life and the next. All that means for people who live in a world that's not their own, who people are in exile. And we have been challenged to live in the reality that corresponds with that. To be hopeful because of that hope. To be holy because of the one that we hope in. So this just carries on with that theme. It begins with a so, or a therefore. If you look at verse 1, in the ESV it says, "So put away." You might have a therefore put away. That always tells us to look back before we move on, to remember what's been stated. Look to the most immediate context, the verses prior to, or the chapter it's in. And so if you look back, what you'll find immediately is we've been told at the end of chapter 1 that good news has been preached to us. We've been told that we've been born again by a living and abiding, a permanent and imperishable Word of God. That we are to love one another. We've been reminded that we've been redeemed, ransomed, bought at a cost. We have an inheritance waiting for us, held by God's power and His grace. We ourselves are held by that power and His protection and His mercy for a salvation yet to be revealed, but a sure and fixed one. We have hope, we're told, and we even have joy despite suffering, purposeful suffering that comes in the form of trials that purify God's people, that reveal to the world around and to the people themselves the sincerity of the faith that is theirs and the power and the changes that it has wrought. So in the end, you could say, in summary, we have a new birth, so we should live a new life. That's what Peter's getting at. Encouraging these people in this world, which is no longer their home, which tempts them and pulls them to live an old life, to instead live one that corresponds, that fits, that matches what is now true of them in Jesus. So he says, "So put away." This is a word that originally meant take off your clothes, and then, put on some others. Throw away the dirty laundry and get out some clean. Hang up the dirty robe, whatever it might be. Ephesians, Paul uses this similarly. He says, put off your old self, as if you were wearing a suit that no longer fits, that isn't quite right for the occasion. Take it off. It belongs to the former manner of life. It's corrupt through deceitful desires. and instead be renewed in the spirit of your minds and put on the new self. There's a new suit to wear, one that does fit. You're created in this likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. In the baptismal practice of the early church, they symbolized this reality. When candidates showed up for baptism after the months or sometimes years of instruction and training, they would take off their old robes. And they had male deacons and they had female deacons so that they wouldn't have any problems with baptizing them, because you weren't wearing anything when you went into the water at that point. You took off the old. You got baptized, you came out, and the deacon corresponding to your gender gave you a new robe so that you walked away from there symbolizing outwardly what had happened inwardly. That the old you had been stripped away and a new you had been put in its place. That's what he's talking about here, this putting away of the old and putting on the new. A change outwardly that reflects an inward one. What he says specifically is put away these things. Depending on your translation, all malice, all deceit, and hypocrisy, and envy, and all slander. You'll notice all in there 3 times. It's supposed to be thorough, complete, all-encompassing. Not a little bit of malice put away, not a lot of it put away, but a little held on to, but none of it remaining. Every stitch of that old piece of clothing gone. No patches from the old put onto the new. There are lists like this in Scripture, every one of them unique, none of them exhaustive, which means you could add to this list. You could go look at, Paul has a list at the end of Galatians, chapter 5, verse 19, much longer than this. He says there that the works of the flesh are this: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these, because he couldn't keep going. He ran out of space, ran out of ink. He had to finish the letter, but there's more that could be said. However, when you find a list like this, a good practice in interpreting the Bible is ask, why this list? Why not the list Paul gave us? Why not 6, 7 items, or 3 instead of these 5? What keeps these together? What here is in common? And I think that looking at the list and looking back just a bit to the end of chapter 1, you'll see a connection. All of these vices and sins are the kinds of things that destroy relationships and community. They're all hateful acts instead of loving acts. Acts, either attitudes or actions between you and another person that disrupt that. And if you step back just a minute and look at the end of chapter 1, you'll remember that he had told them that they were to, this is chapter 1, verse 22, having purified your souls by obedience to the truth for a sincere brotherly love, love one another earnestly from a pure heart, since you've been born again, not a perishable seed. So you've been born again into a new community, one where you have a family you are to love, brothers and sisters. All of these things are unloving things that's going to start tearing apart and destroying, fracturing, and dividing that new community. The new community that they've become a part of as they've lost all their other ones. You imagine if this kind of atmosphere reigned in the new community like it might have in the old. They've lost old connections. Maybe they're no longer welcome in their families, welcome in their homes, welcome in their neighborhoods, their marketplaces, their trade unions. You were a silversmith making idols. You can't do that anymore. Now what are you going to do? None of those guys will speak to you because you're telling everyone that what you used to do and what they do for money is no good. Well, they're not happy about it. But then you get into this new group, and what are they like? Well, now they're backbiting and feuding and fighting. You've gone from exile to exile and isolation to isolation. You'd have lost everything and gained nothing. So this is vitally important that this new community be knit together and not torn apart. As Christians, they and we are exiles. That was pointed out at the very beginning. You could just flip back to chapter 1, the very first verse. To those who are elect exiles, dispersed, scattered through this world, waiting for another. We are exiles. We've renounced old allegiances. We've lost old communities. So the church, it's our new community. The kingdom of God is the place of our new allegiance. We've got to put away all that would destroy the new community. And that's a major emphasis of what Peter is trying to do for these people because of the situation they live in. And that's something I think we need to take seriously too, because we live in a world that's still just as hostile hostile to the gospel. And we can't Lone Ranger it, despite the Western cultural tendency to tell you that's actually an ideal to live up to. You know, you are better, our culture tells us, if you can make it on your own. If you can, through wisdom, strength, cunning, whatever, navigate yourself, if you can be the captain of your own destiny, then you are something. But that doesn't work in the end. And if anyone tries it long enough, they find that they wreck on the reef, and without any help, they sink and they drown. We've got to put away all the old that would destroy this new community and learn to live as community. It's part of why there's such an emphasis in the New Testament, and for me personally, such an emphasis on hospitality. We've got to work hard to strive against the tendency of our culture to fracture and to isolate. And we've got to work hard to make sure the kind of things that will increase that don't exist here. And then we've got to work to build the community that doesn't naturally happen otherwise. So he says, put away these things, malice being the first. Comes from that Greek word up there, kaikia, which can be, as they translate it, malice, a feeling of hostility, a strong dislike, maybe even with the possible implication of desiring to do harm. I'll tell you what, doing Google image for single words is hard, especially if they're bad words. It's like every terrible word in the English language has been made the title of a movie. You look up malice and you'll get like graphic comic books and movies and scary TV shows with vampires as well. But anyway, I finally found this and thought that really wraps it up. A hostile intent to do harm. Want an apple? It's good. Not so much. But kaikia also can mean general wickedness, just meanness, a lack of good, a lack of love. And I think that Peter probably means it as generically as that, though in the context of the relationships he's talking about, you could say malice. General wickedness applied to relationships would be the wickedness toward others, malice fits. And malice harms relationships. That maybe, and we need to tease it out, if we lack love, I'd say you have to question the presence of Christ in your life. 1 John will put love for Christ and love for others as the key markers of the new birth, of salvation itself, of the changed heart. If your heart still has hate in it towards others, then I question whether it has Jesus in it. And you should too. I mean, you can't have a community that's not, of the church, that's founded on anything but the presence of Jesus, on his love for us first, and then our love from that flowing out. And if there's malice, you don't have either of those. And we might think, well, hate's pretty strong. None of us really feel like that. I would say, we got to dig deeper, push harder, not be satisfied, not be content. Part of this passage is encouraging us to crave for growth, to know the goodness of the Lord and to continue to grow in it. And to maybe even go as deep as this and say, we may have said and we may have felt that we could exist in community by saying, I'll love them, but I don't have to like them. You know what? None of us have exactly the same preferences. And, maybe we say things that annoy other people. And we might get to the point where we feel like, I don't like them, but I have to love them. But in the end, let's be honest, that is a selfish sentence. I mean, who's the main person in this? I love them, but I don't have to like them. It's really all about me. And in the end, even in something like that seems somewhat innocent, there is a hint of malice, of animosity toward them. There's something wrong with them. I don't like them because they're not likable. That's maybe just preference sometimes. That's terribly selfish. Now, maybe sometimes the things that they do are a little bit more than preference, but still, love is about not having preferences met. Love is about not being served, but about serving. Love is about sacrifice. And for me to say, I just don't like them, but I'll love them because I have to, doesn't sound like I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm holding on to some things and saying, until they change, until something's different, this is where it's going to be. I put a couple of these in here for each of these words because I think this is helpful. Sometimes we think, okay, well, malice isn't good, so what is? What should we be doing instead? Well, antonyms are your friend. What's the opposite of malice? Friendliness. So if the community that Christ is forming shouldn't be marked by malice and shouldn't have what should it have? This is the answer. Friendliness, kindness, friendship, love, sympathy, benevolence, like, thoughtfulness, goodwill. You know, I mean, we could go back to that phrase, well, I have to love them, but I won't like them, and put those other words in there, and it just starts falling apart. You can see how unloving it really is to say that. Well, I have to love them, but I won't be friendly to them. That ought to strike us as wrong. I have to love them, but I won't be thoughtful. I have to love them, but I won't show them goodwill. You know, at a point there, we've got to note that that's just not the way it should be. But how about we go on? Deception or deceit. You know, deceit is when you convey that something's true, but it's really just like this image made up of lies. It's to deceive by using trickery and falsehood. That harms the community because communities require vulnerability and responsibility. Everyone in a community, for it to function right, has to be open with one another, and they have to share the workload. Communities get just dragged down when you have people trying to take all they can but give nothing back. But if you have someone who deceives, who implies something is true but isn't really, you start to lose trust in them. And when you trust someone, you're not going to open up your heart to them. And you're not going to trust them not only with yourself, but you're not going to trust them with things you care about. Which means now you've lost vulnerability. You don't have a real relationship anymore. We've also lost responsibility. You know, if you are deceitful, people are going to stop giving you things that are valuable because they don't want you to do the wrong thing with it. If you find someone deceitful, aren't you going to withhold from them? It's a community-destroying vice. What's the opposite of deceit? What should a community instead look like? One of honesty, truthfulness, frankness, open, you know? Not hiding things. Sincerity, there we are, openness. Forthrightness, not beating around the bush, not ignoring things that are important, but bringing it out. Talking through the hard and good. Trustworthiness and truth. Hypocrisy is his third. To give an impression of having certain purposes or motivations, while in reality having quite different ones. Just reminded me of the description in Romans 3 of the evil that is in all people. You know, he says in there that there's venom in our mouths. That we speak basically with the lips of serpents. That there's the ability to poison and to harm. You know, they can speak words of peace, but inside they're really a harmful serpent. And I thought this was just a good way of thinking about it. In some languages, there's no one word for hypocrisy. The way they describe that is in these sort of imageries. 2 faces, 2 tongues, 2 people, 2 hearts. It's like if you're a hypocrite, you're somewhat schizophrenic. You've got multiple personalities. The personality that's there on the face, and then the one that's in the background. The one that's there on Sunday morning, and the one that's there Monday in the office. And hypocrisy harms community because it creates false community. If all of us show up with a different face on, then all the relationships we have are based on pretensions and not reality. If someone says, "How's it going?" and you respond with a half-truth or something that falsely implies something that maybe isn't really true, you might not have said it, but you let them think it, that's a form of hypocrisy, to put something forward in front of people that isn't actually corresponding with reality. This happens, I think, most blatantly in our current day on social media. You know, we put our best foot out, we put our best face out, we show people in public what we wish our life was like, or at least only the best parts of it, and then we know that things are different, yet somehow we make the mistake of looking at other people's presentations of themselves and forgetting that they're doing the same thing we are. And we assume that what they've said is true. That's the whole truth and nothing but the truth, not realizing that just like we put only the best forward, they're doing the same. Just like things can be a mess behind, so is theirs. Just like we have hurts and we have sins, so do they. You know, but if that's all we do is put out those masks, you don't have community. You don't have a share in reality. You're each engaged in some virtual reality that just sort of stops existing the moment you part ways.
That can't be a substitute for all that has been given up to come after Christ. That kind of false reality and false community is never going to really help when you have lost everything else in your life and your connections in your family, and because of your chasing after Christ. If all you have after that is these false relationships because you haven't been open and people around you haven't been open, that's going to be a terrible place to be when trials come as they will. Because you won't have anyone that you've been open with to be open with. You won't have those channels of trust built to use in the hard time because you weren't doing it when things were okay and you could kind of get away with being, well, in the end, fake. This is community destroying. That's why he says it's got to be put away. I also want to say, besides just inward in the community, hypocrisy is a word you probably hear thrown about a lot from outside the church toward us. So I'm going to put a couple of images up here just to show you. You know, there are current debates going on where this is going to get thrown at you if you get involved in them. And I think we need to take it seriously. I don't think that they're legitimate, but I think that you're going to hear them. And I think it means that we have to work doubly hard to put away any appearance of it. The pro-life movement's the biggest one right now. If you're on social media, you often see people throwing back in the face of those who would fight for the rights of the unborn, the fact that they're not doing enough with other things. You know, and unfortunately, frankly, sometimes you have this going on, where people will make this stand, but then sort of undercut it by responding sinfully. If you can't read the small text there, there's a guy holding a sign, responding to someone who doesn't agree with him, touch my sign and I'll kill you. Yeah, that's a pro-life statement, isn't it? You know, but frankly, there have been people, unfortunately, we wouldn't agree with, who have threatened, who've gone beyond threatening to shooting and bombing clinics that we totally disagree with, but, I mean, we all understand that's not the way that you deal with that. But that has, unfortunately, put that kind of taste in the world's mouth, and it's given them some ammunition. You know, so they will throw back at us that if we major on this, well, we're not really consistent. Which is basically, and they might blatantly say it, you're a hypocrite because you say you care about life, but you don't care about foster children, or you don't care about the elderly, or migrant workers, or immigrants, whether legal or illegal. You don't care about the impoverished. You don't care about the homeless. And you know, unfortunately, sometimes that is true. It might be that we just don't know how to deal with those issues, so we've ignored them. That still means, I think we have some culpability. It might be that we do care, but they're frankly just not as in our face and as much of a hot button issue. I think that more often that's the case. They'll put this out there and say, well, you're not doing anything about that. And, well, the problem is we're kind of responding to the bigger fire that someone else started. But I would say that doesn't leave us with an excuse. To be able to put away hypocrisy and even the appearance of it with a world who will too quick throw that term at us, we need to be not just better at one of these, but we need to be better at all of them. We need to follow the example of Christ, who cared deeply about these issues, about God, the father of the widow and the orphan, the sojourner. I mean, you read through the law of Israel, and you can't miss the fact that he cares deeply about people who don't have any homes, who are exiles, because that's sort of a physical picture of what's a spiritual reality for all of us once we become his. We become sojourners and exiles. We, in some ways, have given up our citizenship here for one elsewhere. Now, I mean, we really still have citizenship, but in a way, spiritually, we no longer belong in this world. We are just as much an alien here as someone who's crossed a border at not a checkpoint without documentation or the right. And we ought to have some sympathy for that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't deal with it with wisdom, but unfortunately I think far too few people have approached that with the compassion it deserves, and in some ways we've earned the title, or at least we've given them ammunition for it. So I challenge you, as difficult as it is to find time and mental space for some of these issues, we do need to think deeply about this, and we need to start acting about it. And, you know, I hope that you would be one who could show the world by your example that this is not true. That if they call you a hypocrite for standing on one of these and not on the others, you could actually say, well, you know, I can't do all seven at one time, but I am doing this too. You know, not only do we care about the unborn, but we care about the homeless, and so we're serving at this shelter perhaps. Or we have an apartment, and we've let some people live in it. Maybe rent-free, or at significantly reduced cost, which we're eating because we love them. We have an empty couple of rooms because our kids have gone off to college, so now we're fostering. We are going to have grandkids someday anyway, we're practicing, whatever it is. We take our resources and we continue spending them for the good of the kingdom and love of others instead of on ourselves. We don't get to become selfish people just because we have a different standard of living, or because it's gotten easier, or because our kids are out of our home. So I want to put that out there. There's too much, I think, of this. And on the political scene as well. I know this is a sensitive topic. I tend, in my public life, to avoid it because I think that it puts stumbling blocks in the way for the gospel. I do involve myself politically, and I have my opinions. I just don't think it's that fruitful to get into debates most of the time. But this is one that I have felt strongly about myself. There has been a very unfortunate public shift in the evangelical presence in America, where a few presidents ago, you couldn't stop the calls for impeachment because of sexual immorality in that office. And yet, I'm not completely critical of our president by any means. I'm thankful for some of the things that have gone on. I am appreciative of having conservative jurists appointed to the Supreme Court. That is something that I am glad for. However, I am not one who will uncritically applaud everything that he is or does. And I do pray for change, and I think I've seen some better signs, but too many of the people in high pulpits in our own denomination seem to turn a completely blind eye to some glaring character flaws that are just inconsistent. And I do think there have been some real hypocrites on this issue. I don't know if any of us have been, but I just wanted to say, you may hear this because it's happened. People have turned a blind eye to something that just a few years ago they wouldn't, it was a bone they wouldn't let go of. And the world takes note of that. Consistency is important. Morality is important. It may not be the only thing important in secular politics, but it can't cease to be important. So I just put that out there, that we cannot go from one to the other and expect the world not to raise an eyebrow and maybe some ire and ask, really, who are we, if we can be so fickle? And in the end, if this kind of thing happens, what it says to the world is the power of Christ isn't what we really care about. We care about the power of politics. And I don't want us to ever be that. We're going to read a psalm at the close of this, which Peter quotes out of at the close in verse 3. It's Psalm 34. And the psalm right prior to that, Psalm 33, I was reading, also, I think is really applicable. If you want to flip back there later, make a note and read it. It shows and says very much how little the power of this world matters compared to the power of God. Kings should not and would be foolish to trust in armies and chariots and things like that against the power of the people, the Lord of the people of Israel. So, the opposite of hypocrisy. If our community is not to be known this way or to be defined this way, what should we be known for? Honesty, sincerity, truthfulness, frankness, truth, openness, forthrightness, uprightness, trustworthiness. What you see here is there's actually quite a bit of overlap between this and deceit. And you can even see Peter maybe doing some sections here. All malice, and then he says all deceit and hypocrisy. Those kind of things go a bit together. Envy and all slander. We're going to next. Envy. A state of ill will towards someone because of a real or presumed advantage experienced by them. It means basically they either have or it looks like they have it better than you, and you don't like it. Anyone ever experienced that? Someone's got something new, shiny, helpful, etc. you wish you had. Maybe it's something that really could be helpful to you. It's not just the latest iPod, but they've got new windows in their home, and you're jealous about that because your oil bill is ridiculous. I mean, it can come down to real life things that feel like they matter a whole lot, and then we get envy about the fact that we've only got one slice and they have the other 7. Of course, it's not just adults that have this. Children do too. Thankfully, we didn't see a lot of this at the birthday party, despite my fears. But envy harms community. It harms relationships. You see this with kids. Usually they get over it pretty quick, but it's not that uncommon for a couple of little girls to maybe run out back into the nursery and have a bit of a tiff on a Sunday morning because someone took a stuffed animal the other one wanted. We don't outgrow that, though. We just change the things that we get envious about. In community, though, we are supposed to, the Bible puts before us this lifestyle, to rejoice as others rejoice and sorrow as they sorrow. Envy flips that on its head, though. If you're jealous of their good, then you rejoice when they sorrow and suffer. And if you are instead seeing them rejoicing, you're internally suffering and sorrowing because you don't have what they want. Envy takes a community, turns it upside down. It doesn't work that way. It's selfish, it's hateful, it's unloving. That's destructive to any community. The opposite to this, what should community be like instead? Oh, comforting, confident, contented, pleasure, to be content, to friendly, like, be kind. Now, how do you think about that? If you're envious of someone, it's sometimes because you don't have what they have. You're not confident in the Lord with the position He's put you in and the possessions that you have. You don't like them because they've got something you want. But instead, in a community when we have the Lord, we have the inheritances of heaven given to all of us, when the ultimate good is shared equally, if we value the right things, then we can be happy about the temporary small blessings someone might receive. We can rejoice with them in the good and sorrow with them in the sorrow because we have that connection at the root in that shared faith, that shared community. And finally, slander. To speak against someone else, often speaking evil. And this is another one that I think too often worms its way into our relationships, sometimes under the guise of something else. This is a comic book you can find online, Adam Ford. It's a Ford and D. Adam Ford D if you want to. Curiously Christian Comics is how he subtitles this thing. I really enjoy them. They're witty, but also they poke you sometimes. So this is one of his about prayer and gossip. So here's one, sharing prayer requests. Can you please pray for Jenny? She asked me to keep her and her husband in prayer, to have some others pray for them as well. They're having some big marriage issues. So that's enough to know that it's a relationship issue you're praying for. But what is this response sometimes like? Sometimes it's like this. Sure, I'd be happy to. Wow, Jenny and Dave. Everybody yes. I mean, how bad is it though? Did he cheat on her? I bet he cheated on her. Or is it porn? Is it drinking? I once heard she used to be a big drinker. Didn't he change jobs a year ago? Is it money? She didn't get a haircut as much as she used to. Why? She didn't cheat on him, did she? Oh, I really hope it's not that. Did you hear about that thing last year with her and that one thing? You know what I'm talking about, right? Is that what's going on? Seriously, I need the details. So I can, pray better. Think about that. How many times do our prayer requests inadvertently, it's not our intention, we're just humans and we do this, turn into gossip and slander? We cross that line. We ask for prayer, but then we share a detail too many that wasn't really ours to share. We breach confidentiality. We just get into the juicy things. We feel like, we need to explain more. But in reality, all she needed was that. Pray for their marriage. Frankly, that's a prayer request everyone could and should ask for often. It doesn't always have to be about a crisis moment. And she doesn't need to know if it's a small or a big thing. But, we do this. We need to be careful. Too often, fellowship is actually mystical gossip. And we're talking and sharing about things going on in life. And maybe they're happening to us, but they involve another person. And now we're bringing kind of that dirty laundry out in the light. And they didn't want that shared with us. They probably wouldn't have said it to us. So that means we shouldn't say it to someone else. Slander harms community. Much like deceit, you will lose trust. And people will stop sharing. If they know that you tend to share too many details, that you like to talk and tell stories, and that if they give you something in confidence, it may not stay confident, then you're going to find them stop, they're not going to talk to you as much. And your relationship's going to go from one of meaningful sincerity to one of superficial realities. You'll talk about the weather. If they ask you how you doing, then you're going to say, I'm fine. And now we're getting into that mask up, and we've stepped, because of slander, back into some kind of hypocrisy. These things can feed each other, a vicious cycle. Hurt will cause suspicion, and it goes beyond just the two of us. If I share something that one of you gives to me that should have been confident, not only have I harmed our relationship, but I guarantee you're going to be hesitant to share with anyone else too, because the same thing might happen. If someone you thought you could trust isn't trustworthy, well, there are a whole lot of other people you thought you could trust. Maybe they're going to do the same thing. This spreads like a virus. We'll have relationships, but again, superficial, nothing but two-dimensional caricatures. People will only put out to you what they feel is safe, what won't harm them if given to someone untrustworthy. Because that's what this makes you, untrustworthy. Slander, hypocrisy, deceit, envy, that under all of this, I think, is a trust issue. They want to know they can trust you with the good and the bad, that you're not going to get envious, that you're not going to share what you shouldn't share, that they're not going to be treated here like they would have in the world outside, taken advantage of, torn apart, left, without help and hope because you got what you needed from them to advance yourself. That shouldn't be the case in the community of the church. It's that important that Peter puts this out here. So what's the opposite of slander? If we're not sharing things about people that we shouldn't, evilly things that harm them, we should instead be praising, complimenting, flattering, approving, honoring, lauding, commending. You can imagine a community like that instead of one sharing things they shouldn't, but one where people went out of their way to speak well of you to other people, to speak well of you to you, to encourage you, to lift you up. Now, we try to do this with Charlotte a lot, and Evie too. We want to encourage them in what they do, and reward them. It's a discipling thing to help them know what is good and what is not. We don't want to just discipline the bad, but we want to encourage the good. That's healthy for a church as well. If someone is doing something good, if you see in them a reflection of the love of the Lord and you're encouraged by it, please let them know. And you can do so in a way that is worshipful and encouraging them. You can give credit where credit is due to the Lord who did that in them, but still recognizing them, that they have listened to Him, that they have cooperated, that there is growth going on, because that will be an encouragement to them. It'll help them up. They may not have even recognized it themselves, but other people pointing it out will remind them the Lord is still at work in their own life if they had been kind of oblivious to it. And that's helpful because then the next time they face hardship, they can look back and say, you know what, I know the Lord has been at work in my life because my church has seen that. They've seen His evidence. Baptism should be one of those things. You should always be able to look back to your baptism. Membership in the church should be one of those things where it's these people saying, we've seen Jesus' presence in you. We know He's at work. And we can be confident that He's going to keep doing that. You should be too. Well, if we're not slandering, but instead praising and encouraging, then we're building a community in the Lord instead of tearing it apart. All of this now, we're finally into verse 2. Like newborn infants, we're told, long for pure spiritual milk. So first off, like newborn infants, that was after Charlotte was just a few hours old. But what does she need at that moment? She needs milk. What's she crave? Milk. When she's upset, what's going to give her peace? What's going to give her comfort? Milk. It's the only thing that is really going to satisfy. And that's what Peter tells us. That just like an infant, there is something that should satisfy. There's one thing that we should crave. Now, in this case, with the baby, it's milk. This is actually the main verse of the passage, too. We're told to put away, but that's actually subordinate to this. Putting away all of these things comes because of desiring pure spiritual milk first. Now, the putting away that destroys the living community is the result, you could say, of that desire. Because the desires have changed, then the actions have changed. Because the heart direction has changed, the behavior out of that heart has changed. The new birth means a new heart with new desires. This corresponds to something we said back here. We quoted Ephesians 4 already, about the putting off the old, putting on of the new.
But one thing I want you to notice now underlined is the putting off of the old, which belongs to the former manner of life, was a manner of life corrupt through deceitful desires. What corrupted it? What made the old worthless and dirty and something to put away? The desires that led to those sinful choices and activities. Which implies the new self should not have corrupt, deceitful desires, but instead renewed, pure, true desires. Made after the likeness of God in holiness and in righteousness. Now, he goes on and says you should crave this, that by it, this is the end of verse 2, you may grow up into salvation. Now, in the span of 4 years, Charlotte's gone from 8 pounds, 5 ounces to, I'm not sure what you are now, probably pushing on 40, right? Now, it would be odd, because infants are meant to grow, if yesterday we had put a unicorn horn on an 8-pound, 5-month-old baby after 4 years. And if we'd asked that baby to blow out 4 candles, something would be very wrong. I mean, if you have an infant, you go in for your 1-month checkup, you go in for your 3-month checkup, your 6-month, your 12-month. Besides getting shots, what do? They measure how big around your head is, they measure how much fat you've put on, because they want you packing it on. Now, thankfully, ours have always been great eaters, and they've been in the 75th or the 90th percentile all along in those early formative years. Now, Charlotte's stretching out now and healthy, but in the early years, she was chunky. Evie is too. That's good though, they're growing. If they didn't grow, that would be a sign of illness, of something not working right inside, maybe disease, or something maybe genetic, maybe organ issues. That would be something very, not just odd, but very wrong. And in the same way, Peter's implying this should be the normal course of things. There should be growth for these new believers, for all of us continuing on. It should be odd, and it should be even very wrong if there is a lack of that kind of growth, and a lack of the cravings for the things that cause growth. If we are not putting off evil, and not putting on love, then something's wrong. If a year has gone by, 2 years have gone by, and we're still the 8-pounder instead of the 20-pounder, if we don't have 12 more pounds of love and a lot more less pounds of malice, then something isn't right. Kind of an idea. You are what you eat, you are what you drink. We're told to crave pure spiritual milk. And while I was really proud of that picture, what would happen if you substituted pure milk for something else like Moxie? If from day one, Charlotte had nothing but Moxie, what would happen? She'd be dead. All right? I mean, all joking aside, she'd be dead. If you substitute what they need for health and for growth and function, if you give them something else that might taste good and seem to momentarily satisfy, but it's not what they're really meant to have, nothing but bad things ensue. And despite all the promises that Moxie used to make about curing all kinds of issues, including hair loss, you can drink it all your long life, and I'm living proof that those are lies. Okay? You can't substitute what you really need for growth. Babies are designed to need milk and nothing else for a very long time. Only later can you start putting some other things in that are healthy, but you still have to be careful that you don't put in things that are going to harm them. I love honey. You have to be careful you don't give that to someone under 1, along with other things. You can't even give them dairy until they're 1. And there's lots of things you can be careful about that can be harmful. Maybe not deadly, but harmful. The same is true for us in our spiritual lives. There's a lot of things out there you can imbibe spiritually, you can let in, that might seem to satisfy cravings, that might seem like decent substitutes, but they leave you worse off than you were. So what is this pure spiritual milk? And depending on your translation, you might have something different than spiritual. The word that's translated spiritual in this and a lot of modern ones is more often translated outside the Bible. It only occurs twice in the Bible, here and in Romans 12. as reasonable or corresponding to reality, what is true in essence. And so you could say that we're to desire or crave a pure milk that corresponds or that fits with what is now reality, with the new reality. We're part of a new reality, Peter's been arguing, a new birth, a new community, and we need to imbibe, we need to live off what fits that community. So crave what fits with the reality of your new birth. You know, what you used to survive on fit perhaps with the old man and the old body, but you put the old away, you've become something new, and you can't have those things anymore. You know, it's like you've suddenly just discovered that you have celiacs, or something even worse. You can't eat the things you used to eat. They're not good for you anymore. You've got to change your diet. That's what he's saying here. There needs to be a diet change to match the new life. And what he's asked, or what he goes on to say in verse 3 is, since you have tasted that the Lord is good. So what is it that you're actually consuming? The Lord and his goodness is what this is. You know, the milk's a metaphor. So what is it? But it's the Lord and all that is his that we are to crave. This spiritual milk is his word. The spiritual milk is his people. The spiritual milk is all of the goodness of his presence. Peter's been laying out what these things are, and he chooses, you know, most recently to emphasize the gospel and the word, but he's also, you can see very strongly in these verses, emphasizing the need of the community, the need to be rid of things that are evil. So if indeed you've tasted the Lord is good, well, one, it's not saying you've tasted if it's good. He's not putting doubt on the fact that God might be good or might not be. What he's doing is saying to us, you need to stop and ask yourself, have you tasted the goodness of the Lord? In fact, I put it up there twice because I wanted us to really think about it. Have you tasted the goodness of the Lord? Not just have you come to church, not just have you been reading the Word. I mean, you can do spiritual practices and get no actual benefit if you've never actually tasted the goodness of the Lord, if it's still kind of a foreign thing. Think about it this way. What comforts a baby? What gives a baby strength? What satisfies it? Even to this day, Evie is a year old. If she's upset, if she is hurt, if she is tired, if she is sick, if she's, as last night and the evening went, got 100-something degree fever, what does she want? She just wants milk. She probably has eaten more than she needs, but that's what's going to comfort her. It's going to remind her that she's loved, that she's cared for, that she's provided for, and, you know, she's getting strength of that to fight the illnesses. What's a baby do if it's missing that milk? It does that. And you know, what a miserable experience that is. God did that on purpose because that baby needs it, and he wants to make sure you take care of that need right away. And I guarantee we're going to take care of that need because I can't stand that sound. But once a baby's tasted milk, it wants more. This is a metaphor, remember? Once we've tasted the Lord is good, can we be satisfied without Jesus, without his word, without his people? The answer to that should be no. If you crave other things, just like if a baby had something instead of milk, your growth would be, at the very least, stunted, and you would not be satisfied. It would not meet the needs, and you would not turn out the way you're supposed to turn out. If you don't even crave the Lord, now see, this is the difference. If you taste that he's good, but you still crave other things, you get kind of this mix. I just want you to recognize that is bad for you, just like it'd be bad for a baby. But even worse is, you know, occasionally, you get a baby that just won't eat. That's not because there's another option. That's because something is drastically and terribly wrong. And you've got to figure out how to address that, or that baby will die. The same is true for us. If you do not crave the Lord at all, then even worse, something is wrong in your heart. It has not been made new. A new heart has new desires. You can't have a new heart and not have new desires. And if you're missing all the new desires, the only reasonable and logical explanation is you're missing the new heart as well. And I think too often we have been too quick to tell people, you know, you've done the necessary actions, you've performed the rituals. And we'd never put it that way. But we tell, you know,
You've prayed a prayer, you've been baptized, you're going to church, you're reading your Bible. I mean, we keep encouraging them to just do things, and while those are useful and appropriate and helpful and biblically authorized, they are not the things that save you. We mentioned this 3 weeks ago, because it was appropriate then as Peter was talking. It is not the words we say or the words we read in themselves that save us. It is the Lord only. He works through His Word. He works in response to that request, that confession, because the Bible does say you've got to repent and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. It does require those words and interaction, but it's not magic. You don't manipulate Him by doing it. He changes your heart, and in response, you commit to Him. If that heart change hasn't happened, the most obvious sign is the lack of what you'd expect that new heart to want. If you don't want it, you don't have it. And I think that we might need to move that direction when we have people, and it's not as common up here as perhaps in a more cultural Christian place like the South where we were for a decade. We have people who will rest their salvation in their actions. You ask them, tell me about your walk with Jesus, and they will not mention Jesus. They will tell you when they were baptized and how long they've been a member at X church. Those are good things. But they're meaningless if Jesus is missing. And so, you might know people who've grown up in church or who've come for a while, who've made a profession, who've been on the membership after being baptized, and who just disappeared. They don't seem to desire the Word. They don't seem to desire the people. They don't seem to desire the Lord. They're looking in all the wrong places, and they seem to be either satisfied with it or unsatisfied, but still don't care about, not recognizing what's going on. It might be because they don't have a new heart, and they've been falsely encouraged all along to stop hoping for that, praying for that, to stop seeking it. If they don't have the new heart, it's the worst thing in the world to tell them that they do. We were cautioned in seminary never to preach someone into heaven or preach them out of it at a funeral, because you just don't know. You can look at all the evidences outside and have a good guess, but you just don't know. You know from the thief on the cross that it is possible, though I do think rare, that there are final moment conversions when finally faced with that reality. But you never know how sincere. We're all potentially very good actors, and we can wear the mask for a really long time. People need to be encouraged in the way Peter does, to say, if you've tasted the Lord good, always back to, do you know Him? Are you enjoying Him? Put it back on Jesus. Like I said, you encourage them for when you see His presence in their life, but always put them back on Him, not on them. And the same for you. Throw yourself back on Him, not on yourself. Don't find security in what you've done, but in the one who's done ultimately the most important thing for you, to give His life. That's what we need to give other people. So crave the Lord. What is this pure spiritual milk? It is the Lord and all that is His that comes to us with the new birth. It is His Word. It is, as Peter has just said in the previous chapters and verses, the seed from which we've sprouted, from which this new life came. It's also, of course, the Word that continues to inform us in this new life, to sustain us in this life. It is the good news, He's told us, that gives us hope in this life and for the next because of what's coming in next. We're told to crave His, or at least it's implied strongly, to crave His people. They're exiles, we're exiles, and yet they're in this community. And He's told them basically in chapter 2, verse 1, to fight with all they've got for this community, to put away everything that would distract or divide or destroy it. Crave the people. We're to love one another. The bonus of that is that it means we are to be loved. If everyone in the community is loving one another, and you're in that community, not only are you giving it out, but you're receiving it. This should be so desirable to us in a world where you can't find that anywhere else. We who are exiles from earthly family and home have a family and a home in Christ. So we are to desire that. That is part of the milk that helps us to grow, is the community that we've been called into, that God has created, just like His Word does. And we are to crave His likeness. We were told to be holy not but a few verses ago. And then he tells us what that looks like in part in verse 1, as you put all of these evil things away. Put away sin. Malice, wickedness, meanness, hypocrisy, slander, deceit, envy, and the list can go on. Where we were in the past made to be like him. We are, in the present for the future, being remade to be like him. The more we become like him, the more we will enjoy being with him. And so this is something that pays dividends. It's like investing in retirement and finding that you put only a few $1,000s in, and at the end it's worth hundreds of thousands, because the miracle of compounding interest works spiritually too. The more you invest, the more you enjoy the Word, the more you'll find the Word enjoyable. The more time that we spend in spiritual disciplines, the more those are enjoyable practices. They are hard at first, and they may feel like duty and drudgery, but then we get a little more of a taste of the goodness. And when you taste something good, what do you want? More of it. I finally have hit the point where my metabolism is slowing down, and I put 20 pounds on it last year because I like eating good things. And if it's on the table in front of me, I will eat it without even realizing I'm eating it. It's a constant joke around the house that Heather can drop something on my plate, and I will eat it and not remember that I did it. It'll be gone, and then I'll be wondering what happened to it. Or Charlotte's plate will be clean, because I've finished it all off. It was sitting there in arm's reach. She was picking at it, not playing. I started feeding some to her. I tried to convince her to eat some by eating some myself, and before you know it, I've eaten more than she has. A bowl of chips in front of me will disappear, even if I don't like them. I frankly don't like Oreos. Too sweet, they give me heartburn. A bowl or a package of them in front of me, though, and I will eat it. I am my own worst enemy. However, this should also be the case in a good way in the things of the Lord. If you put a bowl of the things of the Lord out in front of you, it ought to get to the point where, you know what? Just by nature and by habit, you start consuming. You enjoyed it, so you went back for another one. It ought to be like, what is it, Pringles, right? You can't just pop the top off and have one. You have to eat the entire sleeve. You start with it, 10 minutes later, the can is empty, and then you wish it was bigger. That should be our experience with the Lord. The Bible ought, frankly, we won't exhaust it, but when you have a time set aside for it, you ought to wish you had more. You ought to feel like it was a Pringles can you got to the bottom of too quick, now I've got to go off to work. I wish the can was a little bigger. I wish the time was a little more. Or time with the Lord's people. It ought to be like, an hour and a half wasn't long enough. I wish I'd gotten there earlier and spent some more time. Just being encouraged by other people. Friday night I spent all by myself binge watching Star Trek. And in the end it wasn't that satisfying. I wish I'd have had people over and a full table and all the fellowship. That ought to be the kind of thing we think after a wasted evening. Is that we just didn't get enough of the things of the Lord. This is what Peter's quoting in the last verse here. Verse 3, if indeed you've tasted the Lord is good. That's coming out of Psalm 34. I want to close with this, because he meant for this to be shaping our perspective and theirs as he closed that section. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul makes it boast in the Lord. Its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad. Magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. Do you get the impression that this is someone who's tasted his goodness, found it satisfying, and wanted more? I sought the Lord. He answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces shall never be ashamed. This poor man cried, the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. And how important for people living in exile in a place that persecuted them, that had taken away so much of their earthly possessions probably and their earthly joys and left them with what seemed like so little, but they found, as they sought the Lord, all they needed. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good, right here in the middle of this song. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints, for those who fear him have no lack.
The young lions suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. You know, just like the infant who's longing for the milk, the lion longing for meat, the saints don't have to long. Their every need is met in him, any lack made up more so by the blessings they find in him. Come, O children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. What man is there who desires life and loves many days that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. So what's he telling them? Find your hope in the Lord. Don't do evil and don't be deceitful. Those don't correspond with this reality. They don't fit with the Lord. They're not things of him, just as Peter was saying. They need to be put away. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears toward their cry. The face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous. They were facing trials. They were exiles. So are we. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. He keeps all his bones, not one of them is broken. Affliction will slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned. There is salvation in him. He redeems, he ransoms. And right up there toward the top, he keeps all his bones, not one of them is broken. That ought to remind you of the end of the story of Jesus on earth in the Gospels. Crucified, punctured, dead, and yet there is one of those prophetic fulfillments. A hint written long ago, come to pass in reality. Sprinkled through the Psalms are all kinds of these hints of the gospel, some more blatant than others. Psalm 22 is almost written like an eyewitness of the crucifixion. But even here in Psalm 34 you have this hint. He's speaking in the present. It becomes a reality in Jesus. And I want you to recognize that, because if we look back at that, that is the proof that we need. If we read this and think, how do we know that's so? The afflictions of the righteous are many, but the Lord delivers him. How do you know that's so? Affliction will slay the wicked. Those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None who take refuge in him will be condemned. How do you know that is so? Because the one who fulfills the prophecy that when he was killed, none of his bones were broken. This is pointed out in a few places in Scripture, so we know that this is a hint towards Jesus, is one to look to for the answer. How do you know he redeems the righteous? How do you know he delivers them? Because he did with Jesus. But that tells you what that deliverance might look like. It should prepare you that it won't be a bed of roses necessarily. Jesus was delivered. He was redeemed. He was given his life back. But he did lose it first for a bit. The Lord's care and protection is sure and it is ultimate. But the dots in between and the encounters and the movements of life might be difficult. You know, Peter doesn't put out that there's trials and sufferings are going to go away. In fact, he tells them that those things are necessary, so they ought to expect them. But he puts before them, if they have tasted the Lord's goodness, they can be sure that that is ultimately what is in store for them. It is true. He is good, he is kind, and he will be always good and kind to his people. And so in the end, as he has put before us here, the big idea, even more so than putting away those evil things and fighting to have a community that's worth having, is craving, longing for the Lord and the things that correspond to that new life. And that means taking a good look at our current life, comparing it to our old life, and saying, you know what? That was part of the old life, and I've still got some of it here. That's a rag of that old piece of robe that I didn't take off and put away. And
and I need to do that. Or looking at the new life and the old life and saying, you know, I haven't distanced myself that far, but I've come a little ways, and that was good. I want more. I long for more of what has changed. Taking priorities that we've had from days past and reshaping them and filling those time slots with the things of the Lord that will sustain us and satisfy us, the things that are sweet to the taste because of the new desires that we have. It means getting rid of some of the old things we used to do. It means stop, wasting time in some of the old places we used to, or the old activities, and instead filling them with things that will be beneficial for our own growth, beneficial for the community we're a part of, and that ultimately will help us to grow in our holiness as well, to be more like the one that we're being made to be like, so that in the end, when we get to heaven, it feels right. We don't want that to be a shock for you when you show up there, and it's very different than how things are now. You don't want culture shock in heaven. Start living that culture now. That will make you an exile. That's what Peter's saying. And yet, you'll have everything that you need, and more that you should want, in Him, just like a baby finding all that it needs and all that it wants met simply with that milk. It doesn't need anything else. It doesn't want anything else. That will comfort it. That will put it to sleep. That will give it growth. The things of the Lord should be the same for us. We shouldn't need to look for other things to satisfy, other saviors in the interim. We don't need anything else to replace Him. That's the point of this passage. Lord, I think too often for many of us, we do look for other things to satisfy. That we falsely believe that you are good for the beginning of this new life and that you are good at the end of it, but in the meantime, we're on our own. I pray instead that you'd give us a growing craving for that goodness that we've tasted. That we'd long for more of it. That we wouldn't fill our lives and our minds and our hearts up with substitutes. That we'd have the milk that we need to grow healthy, to be comforted, to be given rest, and to become mature followers and disciples of Christ, looking like you in your holiness, living hopeful in a world that itself wouldn't give us the reason. That we would find in our community of believers, founded on your word and your presence and your spirit, the substitute for all that's been lost, and more than a substitute, but the satisfaction that we could never find anywhere else. We ask that in Jesus' name.